Hey there, it's January 10th, 2022, and welcome to Triggered. I'm Cory Morgan. We have survived into our second week of the show, and we're going to keep coming at you every day at 11:30 Mountain Standard Time, Monday to Friday. We're going to be covering those issues that the mainstream media won't and talking about the things that the mainstream media don't. Comments are welcome. That's what I love about this live format. You know, we can go back and forth, but I should mention we're still working out some tech things. This show's a week old. We've got a lot of great viewers on Rumble, and I see they've been commenting. With our system, I can't see those Rumble comments as they come up, unfortunately. I can see the YouTube ones and the Facebook ones, not the Rumble ones. We're going to fix that as soon as possible, but I just want to assure you guys on Rumble that I'm not ignoring you. I just don't actually see those at the time. I do read them a little later, though. I like to see what people are talking about as the show goes on. You know, it's the interactivity of this, which is important, and being able to see what listeners and viewers want to hear and see and get their thoughts and share them with some of the other listeners and viewers while we're at it. So today I got a couple of great guests. As usual, I got Lindsay Seewalt. She's with Alberta Proud. They're a group that's been standing up for Alberta rights and you know, just Alberta issues in general. Where do you begin, right? It's going to be a good chat. We only got 15 minutes, but if you go to Alberta Proud on Facebook, if you're a Facebook user, they have a massive following, and they've been lobbying on behalf of Albertans for some time. After that, I'm going to speak with author Michael Wagner. He's written a few books, mostly on Alberta independence. This is a subject, of course, near and dear to my heart. And we're going to discuss a column he had recently released on using Alberta independence as a form of self-defense. I'm going to start first, of course, by talking about our sponsor, though. That's Bitcoin Well. These guys have been sponsoring us for some time. They're fantastic. If you're interested in cryptocurrencies, getting involved in them, checking them out, investing in them, that's the site to go to. Go to bitcoinwell.com, and it leads you into showing you how we can wrap your mind around how these cryptocurrencies work. You can purchase it. You can take cash out from ATMs. Bitcoin Well has ATMs all over the West. There's more springing up all the time. It shows them on the website. You can pay your bills with it. Like, it takes it from that mental thing of trying to wrap your mind around what is a cryptocurrency into that practical use, just like any other currency out there. So check out bitcoinwell.com. They will show you what it's all about, and it's well worth getting involved with. Now, let's go into what's got me triggered today, and that is the closure of Calgary LRT stations at night and how it's punishing commuters. Now, social disorder in Calgary's LRT stations has been growing. It's been a growing problem for years. I mean, we've got a broken economy, and it's coupled with an opioid addiction epidemic, and it's led to an explosion of addicts on the streets. Many homeless addicts have taken to using LRT stations and trains in the city as heated shelters, and it's come to a head. Anybody regularly commuting by LRT this last few years has seen it. Addicts have set up camp within stations, and they're openly consuming drugs within them. Discarded syringes have become commonplace, along with other waste. Many addicts become aggressive, and they often confront commuters and aggressively. This reduces the number of people willing to even ride on city transit, and that allows the addicts, of course, to further fill the void, and things just continue to get worse. It was almost a year ago when the Western Standard posted a video of a man openly smoking crack on a Calgary train. I can't link to it because YouTube bans videos depicting drug consumption, and the Western Standard was actually reprimanded for it. We had our thing pulled down. That's part of why we do use Rumble whenever possible. There's a picture of another gentleman. He was smoking apparently heroin, and that was on a train in the open, and this is becoming commonplace. Either way, before that video we posted was pulled down, it made waves, and it was referenced during a special meeting of Calgary City Council. And to their credit, Council at the time increased the security budget for transit stations and brought in dozens of new peace officers to try and maintain a degree of order in those transit facilities. It helped for a little while, but the solution was only a Band-Aid. And the problem with the addicts is just still become acute and out of control, and we're really getting it today. You know, most of us feel compassion for addicts, and we want to do what we can to help these guys break free from their plight. I've written on that before. They are in trouble. They need help. But we can't pretend that they're harmless. I mean, addicts, typically they're desperate people. They aren't in their right minds. Crime and disorder always comes with the gatherings of addicts as they spread out and they try to find funds to feed their habits. Robberies and break-ins are at their highest in the city and areas near LRT stations, along with other crimes. There's a map that illustrates it quite clearly, and you can see the correlation between crime rates and LRT lines. Have a look at that. It can't be ignored. The darkened spaces you can see on there where crime is highest in the city. And it's no coincidence that most of those high crime zones actually completely follow the path of the LRT tracks. City officials are between a rock and a hard place. They're facing complaints from commuters and citizens living near our LRT stations and the people who have to ride on them due to the collections of addicts in the area. But then when peace officers come in and evict these addicts from stations, the city gets branded as being heartless and cruel to them. We saw that when a video was released by CTV showing addicts being ejected from an LRT station on a cold night. It was heartbreaking. The addicts in the video, though, had been consuming meth and they were being aggressive with transit users. That backstory was lost, and the Twitter mob went after Calgary City Hall over the incident. I mean, are you supposed to just leave them there smoking meth and assailing commuters? There's got to be something done about this. So City Hall finally does realize that the situation on Calgary's transit system is untenable, but in their typical fashion, they responded with a half measure that doesn't really serve anybody well. So beginning today, a number of LRT stations are going to be closed at 10 p.m. every night. They're closing those stations right up, Heritage, Anderson, Southland, because they have been turned into evening consumption sites. Now they're offering transportation for addicts so they can be moved to appropriate shelters and facilities if they're willing to. I mean, meanwhile, commuters who have to use that train to get to work at nights, they can still use it, but they've got to take an unheated rail crossing and stand on a cold, unheated platform as the buildings are locked up. How is this fair to the law-abiding, tax-paying transit users who simply want a safe, warm ride to work? I'm happy that the Calgary City Hall is at least recognizing we can't allow the LRT stations to continue to be used as de facto drug consumption sites. But closing the stations to everybody is hardly a solution. I like the idea of offering transportation to addicts when you remove them. I mean, tossing them out in cold nights is heartless and it could be dangerous. I mean, we don't want to kill these guys. We don't want them to freeze to death. But we can do this while still keeping the stations open. Yeah, it's going to take enforcement. And sometimes it would have to get physical. They're going to have to remove these guys. But whoever said that things would be easy, hey, that's why you guys at City Hall get paid the big bucks. We got to deal with this. And what people got to understand with this is many of these shelters, many of the current shelters we have, won't take in people who are seriously drug impaired or want to consume drugs. That's the problem. They can't. It's dangerous to everybody else in the shelter, and order can't be maintained. I mean, for the other people within the shelter. That's why the addicts gravitate to other places, such as transit stations. I mean, there's shelter space available. We've said that. It's been quite open. They don't have to be out in the cold, but they can't go in and use their drugs in there, and that's the problem. So we need to find a way to provide shelter to addicts displaced from transit stations and other inappropriate places. Maybe we could rent warehouse spaces somewhere, or set up heated tents. I mean, it doesn't have to be fancy. It just has to be warm and relatively safe. It's not as if Calgary is short of commercial space. But again, it wouldn't be easy. I mean, who wants to have that tent or warehouse set up next to their place of business or home? Again, though, it won't be easy. But there's got to be more creative ways to resolve this problem. I mean, for now, while the addicts won't be able to spend the nights in the LRT stations, they're still displaced and stuck in cold weather. And innocent commuters are being punished as they lose the heated spaces their transit fares and tax dollars contributed to building. The city of Calgary has admitted there's a problem. That's the first step in finding a solution. There's some more steps required, though, and banning commuters from LRT stations at night is not a reasonable approach. Think harder, guys. Think harder. We can get there. Okay, that's what's got me triggered today. It's got to be terribly triggering for those people shivering on the LRT platforms. Of course, they're not too thrilled with dealing with running the gauntlet of addicts every time they go to work as well. So let's check into the newsroom and see what else is going to trigger me today. And we've got Melanie Risden, who's been hammering away on the Monday morning stories today. How you doing, Mel?
Good, thank you. Yeah, we are working on a few stories. First of all, I was going to point out a story that, speaking of transit, we put out a story over the weekend, just in case anyone missed it. Transit systems could also be affected by the fact that the government subsidies that were put in place for transit over the pandemic are actually expiring. They had put about $2.3 billion into transit services across the country to help offset the fact that the ridership has just dropped substantially. So so they have updated, they had been contributing to updating the payroll for transit drivers. And it looks like that is coming to an end here fairly quickly. So I think they're hoping that the feds are going to be planning to subsidize it a little bit further while ridership is still quite low comparatively. So that could also affect things with transit. We also had some stories over the weekend too, if anyone wants to head to the website and check them out in case they missed them. There was an update on the bread pricing scheme that was happening, or the bread price fixing scheme that was happening, and some update there on how there were quite a few large bread makers colluding to creep the bread prices up and up and up. I believe they were increased over the last couple of years, 18 to 20 times or something to that effect. I don't know if, go ahead.
Food staples have been going through the roof. We were talking about that in the newsroom before the show. I mean, you were looking at a roast that was $100. I'm hoping to get Kelly Malmberg back on. We had him last week. He's an agricultural producer, and he was going to talk about that, and he could probably talk to the bread thing as well. I mean, we're getting these prices that are just slamming consumers on the essential goods like food and beef and bread, but the producers aren't seeing the money hitting their wallets. So we should try and look into it and find out, where is that money going?
Yeah, it'd be nice to know. I know I was just grabbing groceries last night and mentioned I was looking in the meat section at a roast, normal size roast, maybe a family of 4 or 5, and that roast was over $100. So I would also encourage you to get to the bottom of that as well. That's pretty pricey meat. We've got a couple of stories that we're working on today. We've put out one on Parliament questioning if Canadian cops are treating white pandemic protesters differently, with much less aggression than those who are, say, leading Indigenous protests or Black Lives Matter protests. We also have a story on chartered professional accountants telling Parliament that they need to stop the spending. They need to show some fiscal discipline. Now, a previous record for a total deficit spending was set in 2010 to the tune of $55.6 billion. You'd be surprised to know that for 2021, that new deficit record has jumped almost 10 times. So we're sitting at $511.6 billion in deficit spending for 2021. So yes, that's a story that we've got up right now. We're also working on one. The federal departments are getting called out to stop tipping off their favorite contractors when it comes to bidding processes. Apparently, a new report has come out that shows that these phone calls that are not being documented between government members and these contractors are sort of tipping off some of these favorite contractors, and it seems to be happening more and more these days. So calling on that to get reined in a bit. And our reporter Eva is working on another story out of BC. This one's about case reports for COVID-19. It sounds like BC is now testing everyone who comes through the hospital, and if they do test positive for COVID-19, whether they're in there for COVID-19 or not, they will be classified as a COVID-19 case. And I know Ontario recently was discussing the fact that that is something that they are looking to move away from so that they can have more accurate numbers as to who is being hospitalized because of COVID-19, not with COVID-19. So I was working on that. Yeah.
Great. Well, that discussion has been livening up, and I'm really happy to see it coming out. I mean, I wrote on that last week as well, because even Patrick Brown, I mean, a very progressive mayor who I don't think much of, but was calling out the Ontario's chief medical officer, who did come out and say, yes, as many as 50% of the people we're listing as being in hospital, due to COVID, are actually people who came in for other causes but happened to test positive. Yeah. And that would change the numbers by half, and that should affect our policy. But he said he's going to correct it soon, but he hasn't gotten around to it. And in Alberta, we're hearing people asking for it, but it sounds like Dina Hinshaw doesn't know. I mean, how do you not know? Do you not keep records of why somebody's in or why they aren't? It's the pressure's rising, though. I think it's a good sign.
Well, and I think, too, I mean, especially with the new variant, Omicron, that is showing, quite mild symptoms comparatively, I think it seems to me more important now than ever that be differentiated, because if you're in there with the Omicron variant and you have very slight symptoms, but yet you're in there for some other health reason, I think it's important that is not contributing to COVID count numbers.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, this is spreading widely. The case numbers, I mean, the positivity rate is through the roof. The case numbers are really going high. So it makes sense that somebody going in with a broken arm or anything else might test positive, but it doesn't mean they were there because of it. So if we're going to go into the panic and raise the alarm bells and do lockdowns due to hospital overcrowding, well, this isn't the appropriate numbers to be utilizing to do that with.
Yeah, that's right. Agreed. Yeah, so that's what we're working on right now, and I'm sure we will have more by the end of the day.
Well, thank you very much, Mel. We'll talk to you later, and be sure to go, for everybody else, to westernstandardonline.com. That's where you'll see those stories by Melanie and Eva and so many others that are working. We've got within the staff, columns, original content, all that good stuff. And you can take out a membership. So we'll check in with you tomorrow, Mel, and thanks again.
Sounds good. Okay,
and before we move on, I do want to talk about another one of our sponsors, and that's the Canada Shooting Sports Association. These guys are out there on your behalf. They have legal challenges on behalf of firearms owners, and they need members. So, I mean, get out there, search them out. Their URL, their website is cssa-cila.org, or just search Canada Shooting Sports Association. And they need you to join. They need members so they can stand up for you, so they can stand up for your right to own and enjoy firearms responsibly, safely, like the vast majority of us do. I mean, that's what we do. We have our firearms and we utilize them for hunting or target shooting or even just collecting. Some people have a whole lot of them. They've never fire even. They just like them. And there's nothing wrong with that. But our government is trying to take those away. Every year, they're making more and more of these pieces of property illegal and trying to get them out of your hands. So check out the Canada Shooting Sports Association and see how these guys are standing up for your right to use and enjoy firearms. Now, before I get on to my next guest, Lindsay, she's going to be coming into the studio. I want to run a video, and we're going to discuss that a little more later. But I mean, something that's been going on too from the Omicron, and what Melanie was talking about was, this is spreading everywhere, and it's cutting through vaccinations like a hot knife through butter. It's clear that vaccinations, and again, it's debatable, and a lot of us get in the big fight, they can reduce the impact of an infection once you've gotten it. We can fight that another time, but they don't do anything to stop the transmission, particularly with Omicron. And the people who were pushing vaccinations so hard before, though, were all saying, well, we never told you it was going to stop transmission. We didn't say that. We were always just saying that we want to do it to reduce hospital burden and we want to protect you from yourselves. Well, no, they were saying it's going to stop transmission. That's how they were selling it. That's how they were pushing it. That's how they were flogging it. So somebody, and I wish I knew the originator of it, but all the same, they've put together a great video collage showing a whole bunch of influential people telling us in the last year just what vaccines are supposed to do. So let's feed them their own words and remind them of what they said.
During 2021, we should be able to manufacture a lot of vaccines, and that vaccine, key goal is to stop the transmission, to get the immunity levels up so that you get almost no infection going on whatsoever. Everyone who takes the vaccine is not just protecting themselves, but reducing their transmission to other people and allowing society to get back to normal.
We can kind of almost see the end. We're vaccinating so very fast. Our data from the CDC today suggests, that vaccinated people do not carry the virus, don't get sick.
Now we know that the vaccines work well enough that the virus stops with every vaccinated person. A vaccinated person gets exposed to the virus. The virus does not infect them. The virus cannot then use that person to go anywhere else. It cannot use a vaccinated person as a host to go get more people. That means the vaccines will get us to the end of this.
Essentially, vaccines block you from getting and giving the virus.
People are vaccinated. They can feel safe that they are not going to get infected. We have all the vaccines we need. We just need our people to take it. A, for their own protection, for the protection of their family, but also to break the chain of transmission. You want to be a dead end to the virus. So when the virus gets to you, you stop it. You don't allow it to use you as the stepping stone to the next person. I think given the country as a whole, the fact that we have now about 50% of adults fully vaccinated and about 62% of adults having received at least one dose, as a nation, I feel fairly certain you're not going to see the kind of surges we've seen in the past.
If you're vaccinated, you're not going to be hospitalized, you're not going to be in an ICU unit, and you're not going to die. You're okay. You're not going to get COVID if you have these vaccinations.
Okay, well, we're working on our transitions. We're getting better at that in this modest studio here. So I'm joined in studio with Lindsay Seewalt. Am I pronouncing it right? Yes, okay, with Alberta Proud. So thank you very much for coming in to talk with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here and be able to chat about Alberta Proud. So I took this on. I've known some of these folks for a while, and they asked me to come on board and become the spokesperson and president of Alberta Proud. So if you've heard of Alberta Proud, it's probably because you follow us on social media. We have a Facebook page of over 200,000 people. We also have Instagram and Telegraph and Twitter as well, of course. But Facebook is our main following, and we're out there just to tell everybody, to tell the world that Alberta is the best place, the most innovative place to live, work, do business, raise a family, and we're proud of our pipelines. We're proud of our Alberta oil and gas. So. Yeah. That's what we're here for.
Well, and that's good. I mean, I like the name in and of itself. And I know I may as well go into a little bit of, sometimes people have tried to connote it with Proud Boys or things like that. And it's not related whatsoever. Yep. And, let's not let other things associate with what's a good word. I mean, proud. I mean, Alberta's been getting beaten on for decades, really, in Confederation. And we've had a lot to be proud of. I mean, let's just stand up for ourselves and unapologetically say we've got a hell of a good province here, and we got to do what we can for it.
Absolutely, Cory. And you know what? It's time to call the bluff on these self-serving celebrities who are so out of touch, who don't even live in this country, let alone this province, who are talking badly about what we deliver and about our pipelines. They are the safest way to move natural gas and to move oil, and we stand by that. So, and we do take issue with the Trudeau government and with the Alberta NDP government and their job killing policies and their anti-energy approach. And we often use humor as a way to show the world, hey, look what these guys are doing. Never forget. I've
lifted some great memes from your site. I try to attribute when I can, when I take them, and sometimes I just steal them. But I mean, that's part of it. We can make the message digestible. I mean, we write a lot of long columns here and academic pieces, and those are all important. But at times, just sometimes a short message getting out there can have an impact on people and change perceptions.
It's incredible. So my background, I was a reporter. I'm a journalist by trade, and in my heart, I think I'll always relate to that. But we've seen media change so much, and we are showing Albertans and we're showing Canadians, hey, you don't have to rely on mainstream news as much anymore. Look to alternative publications, look to online publications, and like the Western Standard. I mean, I think you guys are just doing a really great job about standing up for Alberta and telling our stories in a way that's unfortunately not getting covered by the mainstream media. So, and as I was working in weekly newspapers, before the internet kind of took over, and we've watched this transition, and you see that you have to get the message across to people really poignantly, really funny, and memes have become a great way to actually tell a story. You can put a lot right there and tell a story. We also share really thought-provoking content and editorials and op-eds, and you just kind of got to hit people from all angles, and we're really finding that now.
Yeah, and getting it out and about there. And I mean, part of it, cutting through the mainstream media. I mean, they're still there, and there's still some good stuff, but they've really gone downhill. I'm thinking of, especially when it comes to a pride issue, CBC commissioned that ridiculous poll a little while back, talking about who would be comfortable moving to Alberta from across the country and everything. And they found that something like 54% of people said they'd rather not. So they reported on that. Look at that. Most Canadians wouldn't want to live in Alberta. And they got a lot of backlash. So, what a divisive, ridiculous poll to even hold. I mean, a lot of people just want to stay home. It doesn't mean they have a problem with Alberta or things like that. So they thought they'd hold another one, and they did. And they added all the regions. It turned out only 24% of Canadians wanted to move to Quebec. So that one they're a little more quiet on when they got the results of it. But it shows that agenda that, we like kind of always poking and backhanding and slapping Alberta. And it's time we stood up for ourselves.
Absolutely. And that's what we're here for and we're encouraging people, reach out to us, send us funny meme ideas, send us links to great editorials written by, your favorite reporters, your favorite columnists, your favorite experts. Just connect with us, share stuff with us. We want to tell your stories. So.
Yeah, and we'll hit that at the end again too. But I mean, just that reminder. So I mean, your main area is Facebook. You got a massive following there. Not everybody's on Facebook though. Where else can they interact with Alberta Proud and share stuff with you or find stuff that you're sharing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can always reach out to us through social media or through email or through our website, which is albertaproud.org. And you can sign up for our email newsletter. We send that stuff out. And so, I mean, really, email, website, we kind of hit everything through the internet. So
yeah, and the newsletters are good. I mean, people complain about getting something every day, but if you don't, it's not that hard to delete it.
Absolutely, and it's a great alternative for people who aren't on social media and don't want to be bothered with it.
Yeah, and then you can just get the morning email and get those highlights and see what you're on about, and hopefully some good things. So energy's been a lot of your focus, but with a positive bent. I mean, we understand the world changes. There's differences in demand, and our energy sector has been adapting. It's been changing. It's been, producing differently and looking into that. And you guys are talking to that because we're not getting any credit anywhere else for what our energy sector has been doing.
Absolutely. And we shouldn't put up with that. So pipelines are the safest way to transport oil, and they're safer than rail cars. And, our pipelines, like our big producers, they do a lot to give back to communities, to give back to the environment, and to compensate when accidents do happen as well. So we just feel like the media is always ready to go after pipelines, always ready to go after Alberta energy. And, this is the safest, cleanest way to produce it and to grow our economy and to create jobs. And it's just a no-brainer. And we're sending a strong message that we're not going to put up with it anymore. And we're not going to put up with the abuse, quite frankly, from the federal Liberal government and constantly punishing us and punishing Alberta. And, one of the biggest campaigns that we came out with was last fall during the federal election, of course, was we pushed really strongly for the equalization. We want Alberta to have more autonomy. We want Alberta to get a better deal. And, hopefully we'll start seeing some successes on that.
Yeah, and that equalization referendum, I mean, it got sidetracked a bit, but it was still definitive that most Albertans, at least it was a poll that you could say, it wasn't an internet poll, it wasn't a Twitter poll, it wasn't something like that. This really was Albertans getting up, casting a ballot. I was surprised it was actually as high as it was for Albertans, still saying as much as some might have been ticked off with the provincial government or using it for other messaging. Still, the majority said, no, this is not a good program. I think it helps empower at least politicians when they're going to Ottawa. It doesn't change anything immediately, but gives them the basis to say, look, it's not sustainable. Our population is upset with this. We've got to change it. I know it's frustrating. We all want things fixed yesterday, but it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I think so. I think it sent a message. Another campaign that we recently took on is we pushed for the University of Alberta to revoke David Suzuki's honorary degree. And you probably saw that floating around. That got tremendous impact. We have, I think we're close to 6,000 signatures on our petition. And you can find that through albertaproud.org. And we're calling on them to, hey, why are we giving an honorary doctorate from somebody who made the comments that he made back in late November, saying, to get attention, we're going to have to, what's it going to take to start blowing up pipelines? Like, when we're letting these so-called leaders and environmental activists advocate violence to get attention, I mean, it's just the extreme left going way too far.
No, it was beyond the pale. And that's some of the stuff we have to do is call it out, because everything's about shaping public perception. And, Suzuki had been made almost a sacred Canadian icon. Oh, and I gotta admit, I grew up, as a kid, and I watched the nature of things. I thought it was a cool show and things like that. But I mean, once I grew older, I realized that he's a raving lunatic.
Walking hypocrisy. That's
yes.
For sure.
So we need to bring it up. And we know the state broadcaster isn't going to expose Suzuki for who he is and what he's about. So yeah, bringing it to light to people. This guy was inciting people to blow up pipelines. There's no getting around that. The doublespeak on it was too much with people trying to defend it too. So it was good to see an organization reaching out so much and say, no, we're not sitting and letting you talk like that without some sort of pushback.
Yeah, I think we have to stop, we have to stop being so afraid of being politically correct. We have to sometimes you just got to do what's right. And I think if you just stay consistent, people will get it. They'll get the message.
Yeah, well, political correctness hasn't been a big mainstay for me over the years, typically on social media. I mean, that's what social media provides, good and bad opportunities. I mean, we can reach so many more people. We can bypass the mainstream, the gatekeepers of information. I mean, we're in a wonderful age where, a group like this can immediately reach out to a couple 100,000 followers on Facebook alone, or I can get on Twitter and in 180 characters, piss off as many as 20,000 people in 30 seconds. Which sometimes is productive, sometimes it isn't. But I mean, it's new, and we can turn it into something really good.
It's really powerful. It's really powerful. So
We aren't dependent on the old institutions any longer.
It's all changing.
So what other initiatives do you guys have? I mean, you've got more in the cooker coming up for this season, this year?
Yeah, we're kind of in talks and see how we want to move forward into 2022. We really want to capitalize that. The forecasts look really good. Like we're on our way back up, and we just need to send the message out again just to support Alberta oil and gas and keep moving forward on that note. So as far as specific campaigns, I think we'll have some stuff coming up here in the next few weeks. So
good, yeah, because I mean, something that's happening is things are looking good. We're seeing some positive reports. Alberta's doing all right. I mean, yeah, it's not necessarily the government spending that responsibly, but they are getting that oil and gas revenue back in again. But sometimes they're worried that also puts a big target on our back. It's the feds want money. They see that egg sitting over there. Pierre Trudeau couldn't resist it when that happened back in the 70s and 80s, and he came after it. We do have to fear the current government. They might say, you know what, oil and gas isn't such a bad thing, but now it's a national resource. We've got to take this because Canadians are suffering. So, I mean, we've got to prepare to stand up for ourselves if that comes, and that's where this kind of organization helps us as well.
Absolutely, and that's where that's what you guys are doing too, is the Western Standard, right? Is telling those stories, and it's really important because I think you're right. I think Alberta is always going to have a target on its back. We are the economic engine of the country, and I think we're on our way back on top. We were down, we were kicked while we were down, but I think we're on our way.
Yeah, and you'd mentioned with the Liberals, but I mean, you aren't a partisan organization. I mean, I think for the most part, there's the followers are going to adhere to one party or another, and there's certainly some parties we see as more detrimental than others. But for example, our federal Conservatives haven't been the most, at least the leader hasn't necessarily stood up for Alberta as much as we would have hoped he would. And I mean, that's part of it. We gotta be the nipping pain in the butt to those leaders as well. And hey, we're here. You got to speak for all of us, not just Quebec and Ontario while you're on the job.
Absolutely. Well, you can't have them get too complacent and too comfortable. So, like the federal Conservatives have been in flux for a number of years now. So we'll see how that shapes up. But no, I mean, it's very, very important. Like we are a nonprofit. We have no government funding whatsoever. We're just funded by everyday Albertans.
Yeah, you're getting the same amount of government funding that we are here at the Western Standard.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely zero.
But I mean, it's nice to be able to say that. It's a point of pride. Like we can say what we like. We aren't, that's it. When you get funding from the government, you become beholden to them. There's no avoiding it. I mean, if you suddenly 3 of your staff are dedicated because of that amount of subsidy that comes in, it's going to be hard when the government Ministry of Truth person phones up and says, we don't want to see that column run. We don't want to see you report on this, or we need you to report on that. It's going to be hard to say no.
Well, case in point is, but the CBC and, having journalists like last week step down to say, I can't take it anymore. Yeah. So, no, for me, it's a point of pride to be able to say, we're not bought and paid for.
Yeah, and there was another one.
The cause.
Yeah, I got to see Rex Murphy speaking at a fair in Banff last summer. I'm not sure if you were at that one, but
no, I wasn't. But I love Rex.
He's great.
Yes,
and he has no shortage of critique for the institution that he still recognizes and respects the CBC. And I mean, it built him up through I believe the 60s when he began, perhaps in the 70s and 80s even. But you realize that institution has degraded into something terrible that we should be getting rid of, to be honest, as it stands. But the content is just so slanted and bad.
Yeah, and it's too bad because I've had friends that have gone on and worked for the CBC. When you're a young reporter starting out, friends go to all sorts of different networks, and it was the dream to work for the CBC, and to see that it's let down so many journalists with the bias that's really, quite frankly, become infiltrated throughout the organization. It's just disappointing, and I hope that changes.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, they used to do some fantastic investigative journalism.
Absolutely.
Actually, they would break stuff. I'm a libertarian. I still can't. I can't conceive of supporting a state broadcaster under any circumstance. But at least I have to admit, back when they were funded by that 20, 30 years ago, it did give them the leeway that other media outlets didn't have, where you could afford to sick a reporter on a subject for a month and have them dig in and follow up and do some great investigative work that's more difficult to do now with the resources.
Absolutely. And some of their international coverage was phenomenal. So, I mean, they've birthed a lot of incredible journalists and incredible stories. So, and I like to think of them in that light when I think of them, because what's happening nowadays is just not palatable.
No, afraid those days are gone. Well, thank you very much for coming in to see us today. And you're our first with the show triggered in studio guest.
Oh, I feel so honored.
So as the plague eases back, we intend to have more of them coming on board. So thanks for testing our our systems and having a great chat with me today. I'm certain we'll have you back again.
I would love to come back anytime, Cory, and I'll just do a little shameless plug for,
Yes.
if anybody wants to check it out. We just launched a new merch line, great hoodies, toques, sweaters, even onesies for babies, and you can find that at shop.albertaproud.org.
Great.
Thanks so much for having me.
And go to that Facebook page. There's all sorts of good stuff. All right. I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
You bet. Thanks, Cory.
Okay, welcome back. Yeah, so working those transitions to run somebody in and out without tripping over cables is a thing we're going to be practicing getting better at as we go. I think that went pretty good for one of our things. Hey, Nico, I mean, we've had some other challenges. We're getting better all the time. So let's have a look through the comments a bit here. You know, Pat Andrusiak, is it? Oil and gas is our bloodline in Alberta. You know, that's one of the things, Alberta Proud, things like that. That's it. Let's talk about these things. Let's be proud of these things. Let's not apologize for being who and what we are anymore. I mean, that's what's been happening. So that's why I like the name of that organization. It just says we're going to talk positively about who we are, what we are. We're not going to apologize for it. Check those guys out. They're really good. Nikki Hurley saying the government ignores petitions. Yes and no. I mean, they do to a degree, but it does show things. They're watching, you know. I mean, I did work in partisan politics in the past, and these politicians are always watching. They're always polling. They're always worried. I mean, it's self-interest. Most of them just want to make sure they keep their jobs, but they've got to see where public sentiment is going in order to do that. I mean, they might want to mold public sentiment to a degree, but they also want to lead it. I mean, Ralph Klein's favorite saying was always, you know, find the parade, get in front of it. Drink some of that great Alberta water. So petitions, if they're coming in and they really do have strong, big numbers, will make some politicians think twice. We've got people saying all parties are corrupt. Well, I know it's a cynical outlook, but I've worked in them enough that they're bound and they're limited and they don't necessarily get the job done for us, but they aren't necessarily corrupt. But a lot of individual politicians, unfortunately, are. And it is a difficult route for us to change things, but it's the best one we got. In fact, it's the only one we've got. So, I mean, I'm going to get on. I might as well get the comments really stirring up fast. For those who follow me on Twitter, Cory B. Morgan, I get into things on there a lot. Now, something that happened recently was protesters went outside of Jody Gondek's house over the weekend, 30 or 40 of them. I'm just going to throw a guess out there that it's Art Pawlowski's gang. Stop it. Cut it out. It's idiocy. It's bloody idiocy. Okay, guys? You are not doing the cause any favors. Not whatsoever. I mean, people on Facebook or Twitter, oh, there's nothing else we can do. There's bullshit. There's stuff that can be done. And you can do it without intimidating people at their personal households. As I was talking about, when I'm talking about politicians being swayed, when I'm talking about being pushed, and as frustrating as it is, what you've got to do is move the needle of public opinion and the politicians will follow. When you make Alberta's health minister or Calgary's mayor objects of pity, you don't do your cause a favor. When you look like a bunch of goons, you don't do your cause any favors. So Sylvia is saying it had nothing to do with art. I'm willing to stand corrected on that. I was just speculating. So fair enough, whoever it may have been, it was only 30 or 40 people. And people saying it's the only way we're going to convince them. Well, you know what? You won't with 30 or 40 people. You will with thousands of people. And you don't have to go to their houses to do it. You've got to go on the streets. I had somebody else talking. It was another Twitter person coming at me. And this is something I've gone on over and over again, and I'm going to keep going on. I got assigned over last summer and in the fall, and I went to a number of protests. I went to them over and over again, hoping to see them grow. I want to see people pushing back against restrictions. I want to see the public showing that, yes, we've had enough, cut it out, lay off, let us get on with our lives. But when I go to these, it's always the same people leading those protests. And I guess hats off, they're getting out and doing, trying, but most of them are crazy. Most of them are talking about chemtrails and mind control and lizard people. And I know you get upset when I mention that, but I literally heard all of those things at these protests. Not from everybody, but from enough of them that your average person going to one of these things is not going to come back. They're going to realize that this isn't rational. This isn't sane. I don't belong here. And if, though, you can start building that, if you get these things going where people show up who haven't shown up to these before, and they nod their heads when the speakers go, and they feel comfortable around the other people, and they understand that this is a movement that's building. This is a pushback that's building. They're going to come back to other protests. Those protests will get bigger. Then you're going to see decision makers paying attention. Then they're going to get worried. Then they're going to change policy. Trying to up the crazy, which is what's happening when you go to people's personal households, is not going to improve it. I remember somebody else talking about before. Think about it. If it was you, if you got somebody screaming, you got to remember you got perhaps your wife and kids in the house, you got neighbors, and you got these people out on your sidewalk protesting, intimidating you at your household. Are you going to feel more inclined to cooperate with these people, to bend to their will, to do what they want you to do? If it was me, I'd dig my feet in and say, there's even less chance I'm going to have anything to do with these clowns. I'm now ticked off at them, and I'm actually going to go out of my way to antagonize them. We're starting to see the needle move. I think we are, and we can do it through reason. It's slow, and it's frustrating, and people are being put out of work, and people are being shut out from visiting families, and we're having our rights infringed upon. We have a federal minister, the health minister, saying we need to get mandatory vaccinations. Yeah, that's outrageous. We have to push back on that. We absolutely do. But we have to be rational about it. You know, when you do stuff like that, when you intimidate people at your homes, what you do is you empower the state to say, you see, we have to actually crack down on protest. We have to hinder it because these people are becoming dangerous, whether that's right or wrong or fair or not. That's what they will do. We can't give them ammunition for that. We have to be reasonable with these things. And it's not helping. So that video, that 3-minute video, I'll get back to that. You know, wasn't that great though? All those guys, I mean, I love feeding people their own words at times. I mean, hey, we make mistakes and that's fine, but they're not standing up today and saying, well, we were wrong. That's what I want to hear out of them. They got to say, we were wrong. We made a mistake. We thought the vaccinations would stop the spread. It obviously didn't do so nearly as much as we hoped it would. And this is our new narrative. But no, they're kind of starting to say, well, no, we never claimed that. We said it was just to reduce negative outcomes in healthcare. Well, no, there's your words. There's all those clips. There's Rachel Maddow. There's President Biden. All these influential people, they were all telling us that this was going to stop the spread. They were wrong. So now that we know that that's wrong, what we need to do is change our policies. I mean, our policies, so many of them, and the main one, I think something we can push back against right now is the vaccine passport. We don't need it. If the vaccination doesn't stop the spread, what's the point of the passport? You know, I mean, if it doesn't make a difference with people going into a restaurant together, whether they're vaccinated or not, it doesn't change the likelihood of one or another getting infected. Why are we dealing with this passport? Why are we forcing restaurants, bars, other places to have to scan everybody when they come in, to annoy them, to put their front end staff through the stress and abuse that some of them have been taking through this? This is a target I think we can rationally go after. We can start saying to our provincial government, get rid of that legislation because the basis of it was flawed. I like to think you guys believed it was a good idea. I like to think you really thought vaccinations would stop the spread. So if we could just only keep vaccinated people, that way it would slow it down. But obviously that's not the case. So what's the point of the passport? So target that. And yes, people say, well, what are you going to do? Well, do everything you can. Speak on social media, phone your elected official, sign those petitions, attend rational protests, go out to them, take part in one, organize one, speak at one. I don't care. Just don't go harassing people at their houses. It won't help. It's not going to bring them on board, but we can start climbing our way out of this wretched situation we're in. Other stuff we talked about with Melanie too, we're starting to see some of the BS, and I think the public's losing trust with those who were cracking down on us, and I think that's a good thing. I mean, it's sad that our institutions have given up our trust, but it's good to see the public starting to question things. So as I said, when I see Patrick Brown actually shooting at his own health minister and saying, hey, give me that information, where is it? That's a good thing. Because if we're not filling the hospitals up, if we aren't filling the ICUs up, it's time to say this is endemic. But everybody's lighting their hair on fire over cases. You know, it's one of those buzzwords, but it's true, case-demic, you know. This is looking more like a cold, as some people are saying. I think Delta is still floating around. The last time I checked in Alberta, we're 64 people in ICU. And these were, when it hits the ICU point, it is due to COVID, not with COVID, as a lot of those other hospitalization cases are. It's still serious, and it can still harm some people. Let's not pretend it's not there. But it's at a manageable level, which means we can let us get on with our lives and try and protect the vulnerable as much as humanly possible, while allowing the freedoms of association, travel, commerce, all of those things that we've been getting stepped on for 2 years now. And nothing much has changed. How different do we look today than we did 2 years ago? We have this much more knowledge, but our policies don't seem to have changed. We can't hide from this thing. So let's adjust the policies, but it's going to take discourse. And again, it's going to take a rational approach. Screaming, shouting, threatening, intimidating isn't rational. It's not what we're about. We've grown past that. We're better than that. It's not doing favors. Don't make excuses for those people going to people's personal homes. You don't have to. I mean, people saying, well, nothing else has worked. Well, this won't either. So pull it out of your toolbox and find a new one. You know, what else are we supposed to do? Well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about things we can do. I'm just telling you one thing not to do. And I assure you, it's not a good idea to do it. It's not working. It's not swaying public opinion. It's not going to get those policies changed. That's what we want. And it doesn't always have to be, rational appearing. You can have fun. You can be a little strange with protests. I mean, I'm certainly not innocent of that. I mean, people who know me, I parked my car in the middle of the Occupy protests, my truck, safely, by the way. So people say, oh, you drove through a bunch of protesters. No, I didn't. I parked a truck down there because Lindsay was scared of those Occupy guys squatting in Olympic Plaza. And I made a bunch of ridiculous demands like ending marmot tickling and 2-ply toilet paper in public washrooms, some important things at the time. And forced the city to determine whether I'm allowed to protest downtown like that because they're allowing all the tenters and everybody else to do it, or if they're going to show their hypocrisy by having me charged and removed from there. They chose hypocrisy, charged me, moved me from there. I played it all down to $100 later anyways. But 2 days later, the Friday, Lindsay said it was impossible to arrest somebody based on a bylaw violation and that the charter protects keeping them down there. Well, the Monday, the city sought injunctions to get those idiots out of the park. See, I did something that was a little bit bizarre, a little haywire, but it made headlines across the country and it changed public policies. Don't forget that final part. Your action has to lead to changing the policy. Otherwise, it's pointless. Then you're just venting. Venting's fine. Do it at home. Do it on the internet. Don't do it outside the houses of politicians. We can do protest actions. We can do a lot of things that will get the attention of the public in general, and it'll get the attention of these politicians. And it's important. And that's a right. We shouldn't stop people from having that right to protest as well. But we've got to keep it in the realm where people will look at that and they'll nod their heads and say, yes, people are getting fed up. I want to get on board with that movement. I want us all to push back, and maybe we can actually change and start regaining our freedoms. We'll rant a little bit more about that after I'm done with my next guest. It looks like he's on deck. So I'm going to speak to our sponsor one more time quickly. The Canada Shooting Sports Association. I mentioned them earlier. I'll mention them again. These guys stand up for shooting sports. It's in the name. Their website is cssa-cila.org. Like so many other rights too. See, these guys take a rational approach. It's as frustrating as it is. We've got the government infringing on our rights of property, our right to just go out and enjoy ourselves, to hunt, to collect, to do things such as that with firearms. And these guys have got court challenges on the go pushing back against that. These guys are gathering other citizens and public members to stand up for their rights to have these firearms, enjoy them responsibly and safely, as most of us all do. It's important. And if we don't stand up for our own rights, there's something that's true with the people I've been arguing with, when it comes to protesting that, though. We do have to stand up for ourselves because no one is going to do it on our behalf. It's on us. And these are one of the organizations that helps facilitate us to do it. So go to the Canada Shooting Sports Association. They got all sorts of resources there. You can take out a membership, help them, help you. Now, speaking of somebody else helping us, I have Michael Wagner on deck. He's going to come on board. And we'll talk Alberta independence, one of my favorite subjects. So let's see, where are you, Michael? There you are. How you doing? Oh, we seem to have you muted there, perhaps. Oh, maybe not. Okay. I'm seeing Michael's mouth move, but I don't have sound. There we go.
Do you have sound now?
Gotcha. Perfect. Thank you very much.
So that was at your end, then I take it.
Oh, probably. When you're live, I mean, it cuts both ways. I mean, it's a great way to go with things, but of course it comes with some challenges now and then.
For sure.
Our audience is understanding. There's some great people. They're mostly Albertans, so they're going to appreciate what we're going to talk about in the next little while.
Good.
So thank you very much for coming on to join me. I know we've crossed paths on social media a number of times over the years, and I think we've even talked on the phone some years ago or something, but we never actually kind of met. So good to meet you, Michael.
Nice to meet you as well.
And maybe we'll start. You've got quite a background when it comes to talking about independence, and you've been I believe, an associate university professor, or were you a professor?
No, I haven't been a professor. I was just a sessional for one time. But
okay. See, I didn't go to university, so I'm not sure of how all those things work. But I know you're very well educated in these issues and such. You do have a PhD, if I recall.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, there we go. And you've written a number of books on that. So if we could give some background on the books you've released on this sort of issue before we get onto the column you recently put out.
Sure, that'd be great. Well, the first book I wrote about Alberta, the Alberta independence movement, it came out in 2009. If I can just show it here. Alberta separatism then and now. So this is a history of the Alberta separatist movement from its very beginning up until about 2008 or so. And I just have to point out that it has a really nice endorsement from a fellow named Cory Morgan, who had been the founder of the Alberta Independence Party. So that book is a history of the separatist movement itself. So it's not an advocacy book, but it's a very detailed history showing the people that were involved, the organizations that got going, and how it got started basically in the 1970s, and how it kind of faded out with the Reform Party kind of absorbed the separatist movement and took all the energy of the separatist movement. And that was actually an intentional thing on Preston Manning's part. He saw the energy of the separatist movement, and he thought that he could bring it into a party that would help strengthen Canada rather than tear it apart. And so that was part of the incentive for creating the Reform Party in the first place in the late 1980s. Then the book that I've written more recently is this one here, No Other Options, Self-Determination for Alberta. This is an advocacy book. It's promoting Alberta independence, explaining why Alberta should become independent and why it's constitutionally able to do so, like through constitutional law, namely a Supreme Court decision from 1998, the secession reference case, which made it possible for provinces to legally secede from Canada under certain conditions. But nevertheless, it is a possibility now in constitutional law, and that was unclear before 1998. So having that clarity with 1998 makes things better for the movement now that we know what exactly we're trying to achieve if we want Alberta to become independent. So those two books, the recent one is available on Amazon.ca, and the other one is available on a website called merchantship.ca. That's a local Alberta business, a small business, a family business operated out of Didsbury. So merchantship.ca. It actually sells both those books, but the first one is only available there. So those are the two books, so I have been, on top of these issues for many years, and it's very important to me personally. So that's why I've written those books, because I do believe in this movement.
Yeah, well, and explaining the Clarity Act and things like that, the mechanisms for how we would get there when we get there, is important. A lot of people misunderstand what it's about. I mean, I think it was unintentional on the part of Chrétien, but what he did do was create us the roadmap when he thought he was fighting Quebec secessionism by implementing that legislation. But it's told us the steps that we have to achieve now, really. The basis is relatively simple. Have a clear majority in a referendum with a clear question on independence. Now, getting to that tipping point of support and having that held and everything, we've still got a heck of a lot of work to go, but we know what we have to do.
Exactly. Yes. And like you say, I mean, this was done, the decision was for Quebec. I mean, if it had been a decision for reference of Alberta, who knows how they would have decided, but because they had to keep Quebec happy, they had to decide a certain way. But in making an avenue open for Quebec, they made an avenue open for every province, including Alberta.
Yeah, well, for some of our younger viewers, I mean, when the referendum went on in Quebec, there was a bit of a valid point that they kind of tried to play both sides. Their question was very ambiguous. And then to some people, they'd kind of be saying, well, no, it doesn't really mean independence. We're just talking about kind of a sovereignty association. To others, they're saying, no, we mean we want out. The bottom line is you didn't know which way, and they used that muddied water in order to gain supports. I believe if we're going to go, we should have a clear question. Basically, are you staying or are you going? Not some 10-paragraph thing that you got to study.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, Quebec did have fuzzy questions in both referendums. And so that really defeats the purpose on the one hand, but on the other hand, they did that to bring in more support, because what does sovereignty association mean? And so, I mean, it's easier to sell something that's less radical than pure independence. And so they did want to muddy the waters that way. And so the Supreme Court, I think, did well in making sure that it would have to be a clear question on a referendum for independence.
Yeah, and when we go, and I think it's going to happen, it has to happen. When we go, I want to feel confident that the majority of Albertans are ready to roll. That's what they really want to do, not through subterfuge or tricky ways in a question. We want them to say, yeah, we're done. Tear up the agreement. We're starting on our own, and we'll go from there.
That's actually really important, because, in order to do something quite drastic like starting a new country, you do have to have everybody involved, or everybody on board. I mean, you can't start a new country with just a very bare minimum majority or something like that. I mean, people have to be really committed. So I think having a clear majority, maybe something more than 50% plus one, just to show that there is a very deep commitment within the province for that. Because if you have an equally divided province trying to create a new nation, that's just going to create new problems of its own. So I think having a clear majority is actually a prudent way of proceeding on that.
Yeah, well, since I've got you here, Peter LaFontaine's asking a really good question. It's kind of unrelated to the column, which I will get to in a bit here with you. There's so much to cover in another independent supporter. But he's wondering, if we think Alberta could go it alone, or if we need Alberta, BC, and Saskatchewan. And the Western Standard did a bunch of polling, actually. One thing that was striking, particularly say as a partnership between Alberta and Saskatchewan, that the strength of support for independence shot up dramatically when it was partnered with a province or another province. But the Clarity Act makes sure it has to be individual provinces doing that movement initially, at least, doesn't it?
That's right. It has to be province by province. And I do think, an independent Western Canada that included more than Alberta would be a stronger unit. It would be a stronger political unit. But because it has to be province by province, it needs to start in Alberta. Alberta is the only Western province where there has been a strong independence movement, over the years, off and on. And so it has to start with Alberta. Alberta has to lead. But it would be a better nation if Saskatchewan and BC and maybe Manitoba came on board. I mean, the original idea, like in the early 80s, for Western independence was all of Western Canada. But Alberta is where the core support is, and Alberta is the most likely province to be able to go in that direction. So it has to start with Alberta. Alberta has to lead.
Yeah, so the essay that you, column you put recently in the Western Standard, actually, it came out over the weekend. For people who want to go to westernstandardonline.com, you'll see it there. And you proposed, using Western independence or Alberta independence in particular, as a self-defense mechanism. Now, there's another thing. Some people feel, though, and that might be misinterpreted with what you were getting at, that it's a sword to be rattled, but not actually used. You want to use it to try and scare people, but you don't actually want to pursue it. That's not what you were proposing in that column, right?
No, I'm serious. I want Alberta to become independent. I mean, I think especially in the earlier days, when the movement was just getting going in the 80s, I think there was a lot more of that kind of use it as a tactic approach. Let's threaten this and see what they do. But I mean, if it's not serious, they're not going to take it seriously anyway. Like, the only way we would ever get any benefit from the federal government is if they thought we were serious, and I am serious, and I think we need to be serious, in venturing out to create our own country. So if they know it's a tactic, it has no impact whatsoever. Like, then it's kind of like it's just a bluff then, right? And I'm not bluffing, and I hope others aren't bluffing as well. I mean, but there are people, though, who do see it kind of as a tactic to negotiate a better deal with Canada, and I can understand, that's not an unreasonable position, but when they know it's a bluff, I don't think they're going to, I don't think it'll carry any weight in a negotiation.
No, I mean, it's playing cards, playing poker with your cards turned outward. If they know your intent's a bluff, then they can just ignore whatever you're threatening. Exactly. And it has to be real, and there's no point. Something I learned while I was leading the Alberta Independence Party, I learned a lot. I mean, for the most part, I really didn't know what the hell I was doing. I got myself into quite a situation as a 29-year-old, but I, again, learned quite a bit at that time. And I actually was meeting with a couple and communicating with some people from the Bloc Québécois at that time. It was under Gilles Duceppe. And I sat with a fella named Richard Marceau, and he came out to Alberta, and we had a supper and talked. And a bunch of our members got really mad at me because I was talking to those Quebecers, and there was a traitor, blah, blah, blah. There's part of it. We got to quit fighting with ourselves. But I was under the impression, we'd always been told a lot in Alberta too, that these guys in Quebec, they just want to threaten. They just want to get stuff out of Canada. Some perhaps, but when I talked to him, he was dedicated. He wanted out. He was a sovereigntist. He said, no, we want out. And we had that discussion. He said, well, fiscally, you guys are going to take a beating if you leave, particularly back at the end of the 90s when I was leading that. He said, we don't care. They want their sovereign state, whether it's for richer or for poorer. That's more important to them. So, and that's what gave their strength movement at that time. I mean, these weren't guys coming out to bluff in that referendum. They knew what they were voting on, and they wanted out.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a hardcore group there in Quebec who would like independence. I mean, that goes back really to the earlier days because, I mean, they're culturally so different and linguistically so different and so committed to defending their language and their culture. They're willing to take the financial hit in order to defend their nation, because there is a sense in which, Quebec is culturally and linguistically a nation separate from English Canada, and they want to defend that, and they think they can only defend that if they have a government that represents only them as an independent country, and that makes sense to some degree. I mean, Alberta is different. I mean, Alberta does have some kind of milder cultural distinctiveness from the rest of Canada, but it's not as obvious as the distinctiveness of the Quebecois, and we don't need to take the financial hit. That's what's different, is if we become independent, we will be much stronger financially. We'll benefit financially from that, whereas they would, be hurt by it. So we have from a financial perspective, we have a more of an incentive to do that, but less of a cultural incentive.
Yeah, and that's always been a hard thing. I mean, Alberta is definitely culturally distinct. Central Canada certainly likes to admit that when they're making derogatory statements about us, but then when we say that we are distinct otherwise, they mock us for it. But we don't have that very unifying distinction of language that Quebec has. Ours is very much financial, systemic even. We know that the system is serving us poorly, but it's a tougher glue for us to hold it together as well. I mean, when times get good, sometimes we kind of, we don't need it right now, we can put it off. So how do we maintain that support and strength for independence even through the times when it's not as pressing? Because that's when it's dangerous. That's when the movement fades. Yes. and it gets forgotten.
Yeah, it always fades away when there's not a distinctive threat. Right now, with the Liberal government maintaining itself and maintaining its attack on Alberta, the movement can maintain its strength. But theoretically, let's say a Conservative government got in that was pro-development, support for Alberta independence would decline. But I think, and I argue in my book, No Other Option, that there should be a more conscious acknowledgement of Alberta's cultural distinctiveness, like our historical distinctiveness, and how Alberta, our political values have been somewhat different from the rest of Canada, and this can be seen in our history. Like, we were the bedrock of the social credit movement throughout the time of that movement, throughout the mid 20th century, and that reflected the fact that we were culturally different. Also the fact that Alberta, since probably the 1930s or so, has voted consistently for small c conservative parties, much more so than any other part of Canada. So these are just kind of indicators of Alberta's distinctiveness to some degree. And I think if Albertans knew more about their distinctive history, knew more about how they were distinct culturally, that this could help to, provide a stronger basis for belief in an independent Alberta, because we'd realize that there is something more about us than just the oil industry and the money that we get from the benefit of the development of energy in Alberta.
So speaking actually of, you brought me on to a distinctive Albertan culture. A very distinctive Albertan who was a part of our culture passed away just before Christmas, and that was Ted Byfield. I'd had the opportunity to speak with Ted a number of times on independence, which was an issue dear to his heart as well, or even refederation and things such as that. And you'd written a column about that as well, talking about Ted. He really documented and enshrined. I mean, most Albertans, a lot, didn't come from outside Alberta, but they become incredible Albertans once they're here. And Ted was certainly one of them. He had an impact on this province, and he really helped to define the Albertan culture.
Yeah, Ted became quite the Alberta patriot once he was here, and this is actually relevant historically because from the late 1970s and into the 1980s, Ted Byfield's Alberta Report was the single strongest media voice for Alberta by far. Like, no other media outlet, whether it was a newspaper or television station, advocated and articulated the Alberta perspective the way Ted Byfield did, and that was very much a conscious choice on his part. He wrote specifically, we are Alberta's independent media voice, and we are going to represent Alberta and Alberta's position, in defending Alberta against Pierre Trudeau. And so Alberta Report was a very important part of the movement, in the late 70s and early 80s to defend Alberta against Pierre Trudeau and to, it helped to generate the kind of thinking that would lead to the independence movement and to the strengthening of the independence movement. So Ted Byfield played a very important role in kind of developing this Alberta mentality that we have to, defend ourselves against the federal government when there's federal government encroachments on our jurisdiction and on our energy.
Yeah, it was such an important publication. And I mean, that's what's inspired, and it was kind of part of the chain of events that led to what the Western Standard is today. Even our color scheme, is still matching the old Alberta Report of those days. And one of the things I look forward to is leading the Alberta Independence Party is if I had an Alberta Report interview, because at least I knew they'd be fair with me. They'd still cut into me and they'd, be critical. But I mean, when I go on with the Globe and Mail or the CBC, I mean, they would just wail on me as again, a 29, 30-year-old party leader, didn't really know what the heck he was doing. I had a safe space with Alberta Report to actually talk about the issues.
Yeah, well, Alberta Report was very important when I wrote that first book, Alberta Separatism Then and Now, because it covered the entire period of the independence movement, and it did so from a sympathetic perspective. Like you said, it wasn't uncritical. I mean, the Byfields never were uncritical about any person or any movement. They were always, looking at it with a critical eye, but they did have, a strong pro-Alberta, pro-conservative position. And so they covered the independence movement from a sympathetic perspective, and they covered it thoroughly. So I was able to use Alberta Report as my main source for most of that book because of the, because they looked at it objectively and sympathetically, whereas most of the media was very critical to the point of, trying to highlight every little miscue or something that they could to make it look like a terrible movement. Whereas Ted Byfield and Alberta Report, they really understood the movement. They understood the motivation and why Albertans were feeling the way they were. And so they had a much better analysis of the movement and a better understanding of it. And so that comes across very clearly in my book, because I use Alberta Report so much for so much of the period that's written, that the book covers.
Yeah, and as Jerry Clausen's a commenter saying, wasn't Byfield instrumental in publishing the History of Alberta series books? And yes, he put some great ones out there, actually.
Yeah, that's a 12-volume history of Alberta, and it's a great series. I mean, it was very successful, and this is quite a unique thing in Canada, because who would think 12 hardcover volumes in Alberta history would be successful financially. In Canada, most publishing is subsidized by the federal government, and this was not subsidized at all. And yet it was quite successful because many Albertans were very interested in their own history. And, of course, they did that it was a journalistic perspective, and they had lots of pictures and maps and things. So, but it's perfect for children who want to learn about the history of Alberta. It's very interesting, and there's lots to keep your interest there in terms of the pictures and the maps and the diagrams and stuff. So, so that's a very fantastic 12-volume history of Alberta, and it can help itself to help Albertans understand how they're distinctive from others.
Yeah, well, we're starting to push over time a bit, which I knew would be a very real hazard when we go into this subject with somebody of like mind with me, but that's fine. I'm certain, and I hope we can get you back on again to talk about it further. I do want to finish. I keep touching upon that column you recently put out. So part of it is, though, we'll lay out in closing, Alberta is in a place where we need self-defense. We are threatened right now, even if we don't see it or feel it directly. We've got to watch. We're vulnerable, and independence is one of the, as far as I'm concerned, the only tool that's really going to stop further incursions from us. Yeah,
I mean, Justin Trudeau has made it very clear that he wants to phase out Alberta's oil industry, and that's our main industry. And as he does that, that's a threat to the prosperity of every Albertan, not just those who work in the oil industry, because there's so many spin-offs throughout Alberta's economy that result from the development of energy resources. And if the federal government continues to shut down those, it shuts them down by preventing pipeline development and preventing, not granting permissions for different kinds of projects to go ahead. And Trudeau has indicated that's the direction he wants to go. So as he does that, it's going to put the squeeze on Alberta, and it's going to hurt everybody. The only way we can fight against that and get control of our own economic development is by being independent. There's no other way. Like even a Triple-E Senate, it's not going to do it. We need to be independent so that we can decide on our own energy development policies and reap the benefits of the resources that we have.
Right on. Well, thank you very much for joining me today, Michael. That was a great chat. It went by quickly. So just that reminder, where can we find your work aside from on westernstandardonline.com? Where can people see what you're up to?
Well, I guess mostly it's through my books, which would be, on my No Other Option book is on Amazon.ca, and Alberta Separatism Then and Now is on merchantship.ca. Both books are actually at merchantship.ca, but a lot of people like to buy from Amazon. So that would be the best way to get a hold of my writing would be searching my name on Amazon.ca or merchantship.ca.
Great. Well, you have a good day, Michael, and let's talk again soon.
Well, great. Thank you so much for having me.
So yeah, like I said, I could go on, and I will, and I'll be writing other things down the road. As we said, I've had quite a history with Alberta independence, and it hasn't gotten away. I mean, I'm trying to find more nuanced ways to getting you there. I mean, the problem is we're not there yet. One of the things with independence-minded people, I try to talk them down a little bit. I mean, I understand the impatience. I mean, I've been at this for 20 years now, and we're still don't seem to be any closer than we used to be. Saying, let's hold the referendum tomorrow. Well, wait, no. I mean, if 80% of Albertans wanted to go, then yes, but we aren't that close yet, not even. So if you want to set independence back by 15 years, hold a referendum tomorrow and have us lose, because it'll be a long, hard ride to get back there to hold another one when we're starting to get closer to that tipping point that we need. And kind of like what Michael was saying too, we want to win it definitively. You know, if it's 51%, you're going to see a recipe for a lot of fighting and messing around and negotiations and difficulties. We got to make it good and clear. And it's going to be a lot of work, and it's going to take us some time to get there. And he does lay that out excellently in his books. I should mention, I've read both of them. Yeah, I endorsed one of them, and I did buy and read the other one, because of course, how could I pass up a book on Alberta independence? But let's talk about some of that patience, the challenges we've had. I mean, there's different points of view on how to get there. As we said with Michael and I, the Clarity Act is essential. We have to get to a point, though, where there's going to be a referendum held and there is a win. There's a positive win. Well, how do we get there? People think an independence party is the way to go. I'm starting to think along the lines that it's not, though. I mean, it's certainly debatable. And hey, I'm a guy who started one. But where did it go? I mean, there's a number of reasons why that fell apart, not the least of which my own inexperience at the time. But these things have a difficulty holding it together. There's different interests, there's infighting, there's leadership contests. We need a movement, and that's more it can withstand. And we need to pressure the existing politicians to put the mechanism into the hands of the citizens. You see, Premier Kenney gave us this legislation for referenda, but he set the bar in such a ridiculous way that we're never going to actually meet it. It's a step in the right direction. You see, that's the out we can give politicians too. I was talking about that before. If they see a large groundswell of support for something, they will get in front of it. But we have to build that support. They're going to have to be drag kicking and screaming towards supporting these things, and giving us the ability to invoke a binding referendum is an out for them. It's a way to say, well, it wasn't me that did it. I'm just giving Albertans the power. And hey, if the citizens chose to do so, that's the way it goes. But if you're going to wait for a sitting premier to promote independence, I hope it happens one day, but I'm not holding my breath on it. Premier Kenney has most definitely, if nothing else, always been an unapologetic federalist. He's not going to go down that route. He didn't campaign on that route. To be fair, it wouldn't be appropriate for him to go that way. Now, Paul Hinman is very openly promoting independence and secession. I had him on the show a little while ago. He's going to be working on the by-election up in Fort McMurray. We'll see how that goes. The Wild Rose Independence Party, though, they're having a pretty tough slog. But we'll see. We'll see. They're pushing the issues. They're doing what they can. But it's a tough row to hoe, especially if you start losing elections and things such as that. Darn thing. But yes, where was I? Lost my train of thought. Well, we're still on Alberta independence, and there's lots of room to work on that. And so where else to go? As some people were saying, you know, petitions, protests. Yeah, it's hard. There are groups, you know, when I was talking with Lindsay with Alberta Proud, and they're not a separatist group, but we do have these means of organizing that weren't at my disposal when I led the Alberta Independence Party. I mean, we've got social media groups. I think Wexit, when that kind of really took off a year and a half ago, after that federal election, or I guess it's 2 years ago now, they got over 200 and some thousand followers on that Facebook group, and it kind of faded away. That was part of the problem. They went towards a party model, and then they had a leader, and then they start fighting with each other. And I'm not sure what the heck they do anymore. And you see, that's what we do ourselves as independent supporters. We have these ebbs and flows with it. It comes and goes, and it just doesn't seem to hang there long enough for us. So we've got to find the means to get there. And we've got to be reasonable about it. So we've got to figure out, okay, we know politicians only do things when it's their own interest. Fair enough, for the most part anyways. So how do we make it in their interest? We have to change the ground level of support where they say, it's my benefit to support this concept. That's ground organization, that's cooperation. And again, that's getting back to being rational about things. One of the other things I talked about was shortcuts. I've had people send me stuff over the years so many times saying, oh, the Constitution was never appropriately signed, or Alberta isn't really a part of Canada, or Confederation isn't real, or things like that. Well, I don't know. I don't want to fight over that nitpicking and hair splitting on whether, you know, these theories on whether or not the Confederation is real. It's a way of trying to sneak out of things without going through a referendum and so on. And it's not going to wash with Albertans. This is one of the areas where perception is reality. As far as I'm concerned, as long as the vast majority, and they do, the vast majority of Albertans feel that Alberta is a part of Canada and Canada is a legitimate country, though they may want out of it. In fact, I want them to want out of it later. We can't try and sell something and say, well, despite what you think, the country's not real, we're separate as of yesterday. It's not going to work. It's not going to fly. And it's not realistic. So realism, you know, one of those important things. So let me see. I'm going to go through the news a little bit as we work towards the end of the show here. A top story that we've had again, though, and that came up a bit. It's at westernstandardonline.com. And I'm going to talk quickly about the Standard anyways. You know, I've got to make our plugs for ourselves as well as, you know, for our sponsors and such. We don't get tax funding, as was covered earlier. We rely on sponsors, people who take out membership subscriptions. If you haven't subscribed already, I mean, like I said, you can see it from Melanie, you can see it from Michael. We get some great columns, we get some unique content. We speak unapologetically for the West and for Alberta. Take out a membership. It's $10 a month. You get a free trial, so you get full, unimpeded access towards all of our content. It's less than an old newspaper subscription used to be. You know, we're used to seemingly getting everything for free all the time. But what do you get for free, you know, quote unquote free? The CBC, is that worth it? Globe and Mail's behind a paywall. And, you know, a lot of the other mainstream media is garbage. For $10 a month, you help us and it works. Plus with shows like this, I mean, we need your help to share it, you know. Share that YouTube link, share the Facebook link. We're streaming on that. Share the Rumble one. Again, I'm sorry for not seeing your comments, guys. We're going to get that set up too, so we can all discuss those things. We can bypass the mainstream media. We don't need them, but we do need you to help us to keep doing it. And so that top, actually quickly, Peter LaFontaine's asking, will Jason Kenney join your show to have this conversation? Well, Premier Kenney, he gave me a half-hour interview on a podcast a year and change ago, just before Christmas the year in 2020. I haven't really heard much from him since, though we've been pretty critical of a lot of his actions at the Western Standard. I did actually reach out and ask him to try and come on to talk about some things, particularly the vaccine mandate, actually, but I haven't gotten a response. He's certainly more than welcome to come on here anytime he likes. I'd love to talk to him. I'm sure some people, whether they like him or don't like him, would like to hear directly from him. Yeah, it was just Claudette Lee saying, yeah, the Toronto Sun's 275 has 2 pages of news and the rest about movie stars. And that's what I mean. You know, you get a good value for your dollars taking a subscription for alternative media providers like ourselves. So please do so that we can keep making more good content for you guys all the time. And yeah, that top story, it's a rare thing when Derek, he's our publisher, Derek Fildebrand, writes a column. He doesn't do a lot. He's mostly busy running the Standard now rather than writing in it. But it's been the #1 trending story if you go to westernstandardonline.com, talking about how mandatory vaccines are the point of no return in our descent into authoritarianism. I mean, I can't think of anything more odious than forcing a medical procedure on somebody. And that's what that is. That's what they're talking about. That's what Austria is doing. This seemed completely unimaginable in the modern world only a couple of years ago. And they're talking about it now. They're doing it in some countries, and they're talking about it in Canada. This is a problem. This is more than a little problem. This is the sort of thing, if we want to get back to where, if they try to actually follow through that, we should be taking to the streets, not outside the houses of politicians, to the streets, to the legislatures, to the city halls, to downtown parks, whatever. But doing it in numbers and pushing back and saying, no, that's enough. That will not happen. We cannot do that. Again, when it gets to that point of showing anyways, you can't make that pretense of forcing everybody to get vaccinated to protect everyone else. It doesn't stop the spread. So that's not valid anymore, and it never was anyways. We still weren't justified in enforcing it. Like everything else, for try and get people to get vaccinated, you got to do it for a reason. You've got to ask people to get vaccinated, and if they say no, you have to respect that. Where did that federal minister want to go when he was talking about mandatory vaccinations? That's scary in itself too. Then what are we talking about? Fines, bankrupting people, and we've been chasing them around already. We've been putting them out of work. We've kept them from traveling anymore. We've ostracized them. Our imbecile of a blackface wearing peckerhead Trudeau was calling them racists and misogynists and every other thing he could think of. And still they think they need to go further? This is beyond the pale. So this is why, again, we have to get galvanized and we have to be real, reasonable. And somebody, you're a little late to the party, Cory. Hey, better late than never. And I've been pushing back on this stuff for 2 years. And again, if it's one of those saying we should have been screaming outside of politicians' houses, well, it doesn't work. It doesn't. And I've always been against mandatory vaccinations. You can look up every column I got. I know some people saying, oh, now you're saying, I've always said it. And I'm still pro-vaccination. I'm getting my booster. I know I'm going to get all the comments. Oh, you're virtue signaling jerk. Oh, whatever. I chose to. And I hope other people choose to. But I support choice. That's what it gets down to. Choice. Individual choice. I would like other people to choose something otherwise, but if they choose not to, I will respect that choice. In fact, I will stand up for that choice. We need to protect that choice. That's how we can get along. That's how we get a larger movement between people who are vaccinated and non-vaccinated. There's part of what needs to happen is you need the vaccinated people to say they've got to stand up on behalf of those who choose not to get vaccinated. They've got to be the ones also getting up and saying, that's it. It's got to stop here. We can't force people to do this. And screaming haywire protests outside of the homes of politicians and talking about chemtrails and lizard people is not going to bring those people on board. But talking about individual rights can. Talking about those concepts that we all share, or at least most of us do. And, making people understand just how horrific that is. I'm not afraid of the vaccines. I don't think they're going to hurt me. But a lot of people do think that. And it's debatable. And there's certainly some evidence to make people kind of wonder about some of them. So if a person's truly terrified that that's going to harm them, how on earth can we force somebody to do that? You can't. You never should. That's where we're going. And now this is what we're speaking to. So yeah, independent media, online organizing, and organizing on the streets. It's not a lost cause. It's not a lost battle. I think some of these mandates, some of these pushes, some of these efforts are falling apart. I think they're fraying at the seams. People in general are getting tired. They've had enough. They want to get back to normal. We need to give them that path to get there. And if we put out a rational path for people to get there, I think even some of the politicians want out of this. They don't all necessarily want to live in this control freak world. They want to get on with things and put this behind us and have it going into history. So let's keep rational. Let's keep talking. Let's keep debating these things and quit screaming too much. And maybe we can get some positive change and start getting ourselves back out of this a bit. Now, tomorrow, I got a couple of good guests on at 11:30. Again, we're on 5 days a week, lots of comments and discussion we could have. I've got Ernie Sue. He's with the Alberta Hospitality Association. He's going to talk about the challenges restaurants and bars are facing during the pandemic. I used to own that pub out in Prentice for 5 years. I sold just before the plague hit. I tell you, owning a bar, if you want a tough, narrow margin business, that's the one. It's difficult. And that was pre-pandemic. I mean, that was the most work for the least amount of money I ever did. Hats off to those guys who are still managing to run businesses in the hospitality sector today with the pandemic challenges and everything else that goes along with it. It's quite something. I'm also going to speak to Jacob McGregor. He's written a couple of columns. He wrote one recently talking about universal basic income. And Jacob also ran for city council in Ward 1 in Calgary. He's a young man, very smart. I had him on my podcast while he was running. But Jacob has cerebral palsy, and he has some challenges. It's difficult getting around, particularly in a winter city and things like that. But he's been very clear. He's a good, common sense young man. He wants to get out. He wants to work. He wants to make a living. And he doesn't want someone to pay him to sit at home. He doesn't want a universal basic income. But he does understand that UBI money could go towards, those supports, access, things like that, to be able to get around. I mean, he's in a wheelchair and in a city covered in snow with some buildings that still don't have good access. but he doesn't want a UBI. It's nice to hear somebody speaking common sense like that. And Jacob, yeah, he's great to chat with. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'll speak one more time to our sponsor. You know, again, when we're getting into mistrust of government, when we want to move away from old institutions, the old ways of things, talk about that. Central banks, central currencies, government currencies, they're all bouncing around all over the place. Who knows when the currency is going to collapse? That's why cryptocurrencies are getting as big as they are. And that's where Bitcoin Well comes in. This is where you can get into the world of cryptocurrencies. You can get yourself away from the government central bank currencies. Check them out. They got seminars they'll hold to teach you about what it is, because it is kind of a weird concept to wrap your head around an alternative currency, but they're out there and they're huge. I mean, these are growing things. And what I like about them, as I've said before, they turn it practical for you. It's just not something you just invest in and watch the numbers go up and down. No, this is something you use like any other currency. You can take cash out of ATMs that these guys have all over the place. You can set up your online bill payments to come out of your Bitcoin account. It's just like any other bank account. This is the way it kind of converts it, pays your bills for you. It's a perfect service. So they've been a great sponsor for us. They're allowing us to well, keep producing the material we produce. So that's about what I've got today, guys. What's this? Somebody saying Halifax is the equalization payment capital of Canada. Average price residential real estate's $510,000. Edmonton $376,000. Well, yeah, equalization. It's a big discussion all its own in the Maritimes. You know, the thing with the Maritimes is they take a whole lot of it, but they don't bitch about as much about it as Quebec do while they're at it. So maybe that's part of why they get away. But the country is imbalanced because of our interprovincial welfare system, which we do call equalization. That's all I've got for today, guys. Thank you very much for joining in. Be sure to share it. Be sure to check out our sponsors. And be sure to come back tomorrow at 11:30. I'll have a new rant. I'll be triggered with something else, and we'll have a good time. Talk to you tomorrow.